Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take those complex topics, using the amazing sources you send us, and really try to pull out the clear insights, those aha
Yeah,
moments.
get right to the core of it.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into something that, well, it's fascinated humans forever, hasn't it? From ancient philosophers right up to today's scientists, we're talking about the mystery of aging.
It really has. I mean, you look back at Plato, he thought living longer gave people a chance to, get a deeper philosophical handle on life,
Mhm.
sort of transcend its limits.
Mhm.
But then there's Giacomo Leopardi, the Italian poet. He kind of nailed the paradox, didn't he? He said something like, old age is the supreme evil, deprives us of pleasures, leaves only the appetite, brings all the sufferings.
Oh,
Nevertheless, he says, we fear death and we desire old age.
yeah.
Yeah, it really sets the scene.
That's a really crucial point. It reminds us aging is way more than just, wrinkles or going gray.
Right.
Broadly speaking, aging just means the changes over a lifespan. But for this deep dive, we're zeroing in on senescence, which is more specific. It's that progressive decline in how our bodies work over time. And that ultimately ramps up the risk of disease, disability, or, well, death.
Understanding that difference is key. Because aging, it's inherently complex. It happens at every single level of our biology.
From molecules up to whole organ systems.
Exactly, from the tiny machines inside our cells all the way up. And, for a long time, researchers were kind of hunting for that one single grand theory to explain everything.
The unified theory of getting old.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But now we understand it's much more. It's multifactorial. Lots of things going on.
Okay, so we've got a sense of what aging is, broadly. Let's get to the heart of this deep dive, then. We're not just listing symptoms. We want to get at the why.
Right. The fundamental drivers.
Our mission today is to explore not just what happens when we age, but why it happens. We'll unpack the main scientific theories, look at the actual biochemistry involved, and even peek at what's happening now and what might be coming with anti-aging therapies. And this is all straight from the fantastic source material you shared with us, so you should walk away with a much richer understanding, hopefully without getting totally lost in the weeds.
Let's do it.
So that brings us to maybe the biggest question, the one scientists, philosophers, everyone's been asking for centuries: why do we age?
The fundamental question.
Yeah. And you mentioned for a long time the search was on for that single answer.
Yeah.
But now we know it's way more complex, multifactorial. How do scientists even start to organize all the different ideas?
It is sprawling. You're right. I mean, there are literally hundreds of theories out there, but most of them, they tend to fall into one of two main buckets, you could say.
Okay.
Program theories and damage theories. And then there's sort of a third category that tries to bring those two together.
Okay, let's tackle program theories first. So the idea here is aging is deliberate, like it's programmed into us, maybe for some evolutionary reason.
That's the core idea, yeah. Like it's a kind of planned deterioration. Maybe it helps prevent overpopulation or pushes evolution forward by making room for new generations, something like that.
Is there actual evidence for this kind of like built-in expiry date?
Well, there are some intriguing hints from studies, like work on yeast cells. It seems like their spores have ways to shed all the age-related damage when they scorulate. It's like a reset.
Interesting.
And then there's the tiny worm, C. elegans. If things get tough, like not enough food or too crowded, it can go into this state called dower.
Dower, like durable.
Yeah, sort of a stasis, a developmental pause. And what's really interesting is when it comes out of that state, it actually lives longer as an adult.
Huh.
So that hints that maybe aging and development are linked, programmed together, at least in some organisms.
Like hitting pause extends the playback time. And proponents also talk about aging genes, right? Specific genes driving this program.
They do.
Yeah.
But, there are strong counter-arguments too.
Okay, what are they?
Well, the main one is that development, yeah, that's clearly programmed, very precise. But aging,
Hmm.
it mostly looks like decay, like things breaking down, not some finely tuned beneficial process.
Right. Doesn't feel very advantageous.
Exactly. And we haven't found any single gene mutation that just stops aging completely.
Yeah.
You kind of expect that if it was purely programmed. Plus, look at the huge lifespan differences between species, even when they live in the same conditions. It doesn't suggest a single fixed timeline for everyone.
Hmm.
And actually, an older idea was that maybe hormone changes drive aging like less growth hormone. But that's largely unsubstantiated. If anything, less growth hormone and IGF-1 signaling seems to increase lifespan in some animals, not the other way around.
Okay, so the evidence for a strict program is, well, it's debated.
Definitely debated.
Which leads us to the other big category, damage theories. This sounds like almost the opposite idea. Aging isn't planned, it's just stuff breaking down, wear and tear.
You got it. It's the accumulation of, turns out, really small amounts of ROS can actually trigger a positive response in the cell. It's called mitohormesis.
Mitohormesis.
It's like a little bit of stress makes the cell stronger, boosts its own defense systems. So it's not about eliminating ROS completely, it's about balance.
So just gulping down antioxidants might not be the simple answer everyone thinks it is.
Exactly. It's more nuanced than that. A delicate dance.
Okay, fascinating. What other kinds of damage contribute?
Well, there's protein aggregation. When proteins get damaged by oxidation, it's irreversible. They're supposed to be broken down by the proteasome, the cell's recycling center.
Right.
But as we age, the proteasome doesn't always keep up. It gets impaired. So these damaged oxidized proteins start clumping together into these insoluble masses called agresomes.
Agresomes, and that's bad.
Very bad. That buildup is directly linked to neurodegenerative diseases. Think Parkinson's, Alzheimer's.
Wow, it's like the cell's garbage disposal breaks down and the trash piles up, causing major problems.
That's a good analogy. And figuring out how to maybe boost that proteasome activity or clear those agresomes, that's a huge focus of research.
I bet.
Then beyond oxygen damage, you also have nitrosative damage. That's from reactive nitrogen species, RNS. Similar idea contributes to things like liver issues, heart problems, sleep trouble, dementia.
Okay, so oxygen and nitrogen radicals. What about AGs? Advanced glycation end products? I've heard those linked to diet, like sugary foods?
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
AGs form when sugars react with proteins or lipids or DNA without needing an enzyme. It's the Maillard reaction, the same thing that browns your toast.
Huh. So that browning reaction happens inside us too?
It does, slowly, over time.
Yeah.
And these accumulated AGEs are tied to chronic diseases, diabetes, cardiovascular problems, cognitive decline. Plus, they promote more oxidative stress and inflammation, creating this nasty positive feedback loop with their receptor, called rage.
So sugary foods in just time lead to this internal browning that gums things up and causes inflammation. That's quite a thought.
It is. And it highlights the link between metabolism, diet, and aging processes.
What about the blueprint itself? Our DNA. Surely that takes a beating over the years.
Absolutely. DNA integrity is under constant attack from inside and out. And if our DNA repair systems falter, that can cause big problems, even leading to premature aging syndromes, like Werner syndrome.
Right. And a famous part of DNA damage in aging is telomere shortening, isn't it?
Telomeres are those protective caps at the ends of our chromosomes, like the plastic tips on shoelaces.
Okay.
Every time a cell divides, they get a little bit shorter. Eventually, they get too short, and the cell stops dividing. That's the Hayflick limit.
And there's an enzyme, telomerase, that can rebuild them.
Correct. Introducing telomerase can actually make human cells keep dividing indefinitely in a lab dish, in vitro.
So that sounds like the answer. Just boost telomerase, stop telomere shortening, stop aging.
Ah, if only it were that simple.
Okay, what's the catch?
Well, the science gets tricky here. When you actually look at human cells in culture, and you control carefully for the donor's health and stuff, you don't always see a strong link between the donor's age and how many times their cells can divide.
Huh. So it's not a perfect clock.
It doesn't seem to be. Not always. Plus, mice that are engineered to have lots of telomerase, they don't necessarily live longer overall. And here's the big worry. Cancer cells often have high telomerase activity.
Ah, because they need to divide indefinitely.
Exactly. So boosting telomerase everywhere could potentially increase cancer risk. It's a major safety concern.
Right, you don't want to solve one problem by creating a much worse one.
Okay, so telomeres are complicated. What about the DNA in our mitochondria, the mtDNA?
That's another important piece. Mitochondrial DNA mutates way faster than the DNA in our cell nucleus. And it's right there in the line of fire for all that oxidative damage we talked about.
Makes sense?
And you can get this situation called heteroplasmy.
Heteroplasmy. It just means within a single cell, you can have a mix of mitochondria, some with the original mtDNA, some with mutated versions, having different instruction manuals floating around.
Okay.
And the proportion of those mutated versions, that level of heteroplasmy, some researchers think it might be a way to predict age-related problems. But exactly how those mtDNA mutations translate into the broader signs of aging, that link is still being worked out.
Got it. So many different damage mechanisms. Oxidative, nitrosative, protein clumping, AGEs, DNA damage in the nucleus, DNA damage in the mitochondria. It's a lot.
It really is. Which makes it pretty clear why finding one single theory has been so hard.
So that must be where the combined theories come in, right? Trying to tie all this together.
Exactly. The thinking here is that aging isn't just one thing failing, it's a whole network. It's chemical, biochemical, biophysical, maybe even electrical processes, all interacting and influencing each other.
A systems level view.
Precisely. An early attempt to unify things was by Strehler back in '76. He laid out 4 postulates for aging. He said it has to be universal,
Happens to everyone.
intrinsic,
Comes from within.
progressive,
Gets worse over time.
and deleterious.
Meaning it's harmful, no upside.
Right. Captures the basics pretty well.
That makes a lot of sense intuitively. Are there other combined ideas that go beyond just listing damage types?
Yeah, there have been others, like the membrane hypothesis, the idea that cell membranes get stiffer with age, which messes up transport and signaling.
Okay.
And more recently, something called the fading electricity theory.
Fading electricity, like our cells are running out of juice.
Kind of. The idea is that cells gradually lose their ability to generate their own electrical potential, and this disrupts all those biochemical processes we've been talking about, leading to senescence and eventually death.
That's a really different way of thinking about it, like tiny biological batteries wearing out.
It is, and it really underscores that key takeaway.
Yeah.
There's no single dominant theory right now. It's the interconnectedness, the network effects that seem crucial. We really need that systems-level integrative approach to understand it properly.
Okay, so we've explored the why the theory is trying to explain aging. Now let's pivot to the what. What actually changes in us as we get older? Across all these different levels, molecular, physiological, pathological, even psychological.
And it's a huge challenge, like you said earlier, to figure out what the most important drivers are, because everything interacts.
Right, so starting at the smallest level. Molecular changes. We know genes play a role.
Rationally. The sources suggest genetics account for maybe 25% to 32% of the variation in how long we live.
Yeah.
That's a significant chunk.
And are there specific molecules that change dramatically?
Oh, yeah. Some really striking examples in the materials, like calcium-binding protein A8, up by over 1,200% in older people.
Wow.
And a microRNA, miR320b, up nearly 50%. But then others go way down, like miR106a, plummeting almost 99%.
Those numbers are just wild. But again, the big question, are these huge shifts causing aging, or are they just markers of it, consequences?
Exactly. That cause versus consequence puzzle is central. And it gets even more complicated because you see differences between species mouse cells age differently than human cells. And even within us, different cell types, like skin cells versus muscle cells, seem to follow slightly different paths towards senescence. There isn't just one single molecular road to aging.
Which is where all that omics research comes in, genomics, proteomics.
Precisely. These powerful tools let us map these molecular changes in incredible detail across a lifespan. Genomics looks at genes, proteomics at proteins, metabolomics at metabolic byproducts.
Giving us a high-resolution picture.
Yeah, but it also shows we really need standardized methods. Different labs doing things slightly differently can get quite different results, and we need to keep reanalyzing the data as our understanding grows.
Makes sense. Okay, moving up a level, physiological changes. What happens to our body's systems? The sources say all organ systems are affected.
Pretty much yes. It's systemic. For example, the heart's output tends to decrease. Blood pressure often goes up, leading to arteriosclerosis, hardening of the arteries.
Okay.
Joints degenerate. We lose muscle mass, that's sarcopenia, which affects strength and mobility. Lungs become less efficient. We can't exhale as forcefully.
And eyes. I know vision changes are common.
Right. Presbyopia needing reading glasses is almost universal. Cataracts become much more common. Even inside the brain, the metabolism of neurons slows down, and things like collagen build up in arteries, making them stiffer.
But I remember reading something about common myths here. Like, do we really lose huge numbers of brain cells?
Good point. The sources clarify that's largely a myth. Global neuron loss between age 20 and 90 is actually less than 10% overall.
Oh, okay. That's much less than I thought.
Yeah, it's not massive cell death. But there are important changes. We lose synapses, the connections between neurons. Axons can lose their myelin sheath. Dendrites lose spines. So the structure changes, and that affects function, even without wholesale neuron loss.
Got it. Function changes more than just raw numbers.
Exactly. And another one is skin thinning, that hypodermal atrophy. It's often regional. More on the face and hands, less on the waist or thighs, maybe linked to sun exposure.
Interesting nuances. Okay, so physiological changes are widespread. How does that relate to pathological changes? Where's the line between normal aging and actual disease?
It's often a blurry line, honestly, and telling the difference often just relies on watching things over time. But the statistics on age-related diseases are pretty dramatic,
Like what?
like cancer incidence. Over 370 times higher in 85-year-olds compared to 18 to 24-year-olds.
370 times. Wow.
Yeah, or rheumatic heart disease. 165 times higher in the 85-plus group compared to 25 to 44-year-olds.
Just staggering increases in risk.
Absolutely. And then you have the rise in coronary artery disease, COPD, hearing loss, presbycusis, kidney issues like renal arteriosclerosis, GERD, or acid reflux. The list goes on. The risk for many chronic diseases just climbs steeply with age.
It paints a stark picture. And finally, what about psychological changes? This must be complex, tied up with stress, how society views aging.
Totally. There's that cultural pressure, the elderly must learn to age idea, the stereotypes from a youth-obsessed culture portraying older people as just slower.
Yeah.
But beyond the cultural stuff, there are measurable psychological shifts. Things like speech can slow down, finding words might become harder, sleep patterns change more, waking up during the night, depression rates increase after 65. And while it varies a lot person to person, some degree of cognitive decline is very common in older age. Things like processing speed slowing down, changes in executive functions like planning, and memory impairment.
So it really is a full body, full mind process. Well, it sounds a bit daunting, mapping it all out like that.
Making it feel that way.
But understanding the what and the why naturally leads to the big question for most of us. Can we actually do anything about it? Can we intervene?
Right. And that immediately brings up big questions, not just scientific ones, but ethical ones too. Like, is aging even a disease we should try to cure?
Yeah, if disease is an abnormality, but aging happens to everyone.
Exactly. It doesn't quite fit the definition, even though it's the biggest risk factor for so many diseases. And people worry about the consequences of drastically extending lifespan, overpopulation, inequality. Maybe the economy couldn't handle it.
But the counterargument is this longevity escape velocity idea, right? That if we can extend healthy life by a year, we gain a year for science to find even better therapies.
That's the hope for some. But regardless of that whole debate, pretty much everyone agrees we should be fighting the age-related illnesses that cause suffering and reduce quality of life.
Okay, absolutely. So if we're looking at interventions, what's the crucial takeaway from all the complexity we've discussed?
I think it's that because aging is so multifactorial, hitting so many systems, there's almost certainly not going to be one single silver bullet. No magic pill to stop it all.
Right, it'll have to be a combination of approaches, most likely.
So let's look at what we're trying now. What's considered the kind of gold standard intervention in lab studies for extending lifespan?
That would be caloric restriction, or CR.
Just eating less.
Pretty much, yeah. Reducing calorie intake without malnutrition. It's been known since the 1930s to extend lifespan, sometimes quite dramatically, in all sorts of lab animals: yeast, worms, flies, rodents.
And how does it work? Do we know?
Well, there are several theories. Maybe it ramps up the body's antioxidant defenses. Maybe it makes metabolism more efficient. Maybe it literally just slows down some kind of underlying genetic program for aging. The exact mechanisms are still debated, but the effect is robust in the lab. Our sources call it the sole therapy capable of potentially delaying aging.
That's a really strong statement.
Yeah.
But obviously hard for humans to stick to long term.
Extremely hard, yes. And the effects in longer-lived primates, including humans, are still not fully clear.
Okay. What about stem cells? There's always so much excitement around stem cells for regeneration. Huge promise, definitely. The idea is to replace or rejuvenate aging tissues by introducing healthy stem cells. They could potentially treat things like muscle wasting, maybe skin aging.
Sounds great in theory.
In theory, yes. But translating that to effective anti-aging therapies in humans, well, there's no direct proof it works broadly yet. The mechanisms are still a bit vague in complex organisms, and there are big technical challenges in getting the right cells, making sure they're safe, getting where they need to go. Lots of hurdles still.
Okay, so promise, but not quite there yet. What about tackling those AGs, the advanced glycation end products, the browning stuff?
Right. Well, we know from studies that restricting AGDs in the diet can prevent some tissue damage. And it's interesting that people who live to be 100 often report eating low-calorie diets, which would likely be lower in AGEs too.
Dietary link.
Yeah. And then there are drugs being tested. Things like aminoguanidine, metformin, which is actually a common diabetes drug, and another one called ALT-711, that can actually break the cross-links AGs form. It's shown some potential in animal models for things like heart failure or kidney problems and diabetes.
So drugs that act like molecular crowbars, breaking up those AGEs?
Kind of, yeah. But again,
Huh.
we don't fully know their long-term effects or side effects in humans used broadly for anti-aging.
Yeah.
And there's this interesting link with exercise, too, as it seems like exercise might help reduce AGs, or maybe breaking AGs helps exercise tolerance. That relationship isn't totally clear yet.
Lots of unknowns. Okay, what about hormones? Growth hormone, for instance. Didn't that used to be hyped as a youth elixir?
Oh, absolutely. There was a lot of buzz because GH levels naturally decline with age, and some early small studies suggested it might have some benefits for muscle mass or skin thickness in older adults.
Right?
But the follow-up hasn't been so positive. Using GH as a general anti-aging strategy is now considered imprudent, according to the sources,
Imprudent. Why?
because of the side effects. It can cause things like swelling, joint pain, high blood pressure, increased diabetes risk. And the really big worry is a potential link to increased cancer risk. The downsides seem to outweigh any potential anti-aging benefits for most people.
Oof. Yeah, that sounds like a bad trade-off. A good example of why we need proper long-term studies.
Definitely.
Okay, now for the big one everyone asks about. Antioxidants. We see supplements everywhere promising to fight aging by neutralizing those ROS. Do they work?
Well, here's another place where the initial hype met a more complicated reality. Our bodies have their own antioxidant defense systems, and we get antioxidants from our diet, which is important for overall health.
Sure, fruits, vegetables.
Right. But taking high-dose antioxidant supplements, the evidence that they actually delay aging itself just isn't there.
So they don't slow down the fundamental process.
Seems not. They might contribute to longevity by protecting against certain diseases, maybe, but they don't appear to slow the clock. The sources mention a study where giving mice vitamin C didn't help because the mice just lowered their own natural antioxidant production to compensate.
Ah, the body adapts.
Exactly. And worse, some large human studies show these supplements often have no effect on mortality, and some high doses might even be harmful, like accelerating cancer growth in some animal studies.
Whoa, harmful.
Potentially, yes, at high doses or for certain supplements. The strong recommendation is to get your antioxidants from a healthy diet, not rely on pills, especially high-dose ones.
That's a really crucial message. So eat well, don't just pop pills. Got it. What about telomere therapies, trying to lengthen those chromosome caps?
Yeah, building on the idea that shorter telomeres mean older cells, you can actually buy kits now to measure your telomere length, marketed as a measure of biological age.
But do they actually predict biological age well?
The evidence for that in humans is pretty weak, actually. Chronological age is still usually a better predictor. And as for therapies to extend telomeres, like using telomerase activators, well, we saw in vitro it can make cells divide longer, and some mouse studies showed it could reverse tissue degeneration.
Mm-hmm.
There are supplements out there, like TA65, derived from a plant root. Some studies show it might improve certain health markers, like immune function or bone density.
But does it make you live longer?
No definitive proof of lifespan extension in humans.
Yeah.
And again, you always have that hovering concern about cancer risk if you broadly activate telomerase. It's still a very tricky area.
Okay, so it feels like a lot of the current approaches have significant caveats, limitations, or unknowns. Caloric restriction works in labs but is hard for humans. Stem cells are promising but early. AGE breakers are unclear. Hormones are risky. Antioxidant pills are ineffective or potentially harmful. Telomeres are complex and risky.
That's a fair summary of the challenges, yeah.
It really makes you wonder then, what's next? What does the future look like? Are there things coming down the pipeline that seem more genuinely promising, maybe more targeted?
There definitely are some exciting areas on the horizon. One is rapamycin.
Rapamycin, I've heard of that. It's an immunosuppressant.
It is, yeah. But studies found it can extend maximum lifespan in mammals, like mice, maybe partly by suppressing cancer development. It works by inhibiting a key pathway called TOR, which is involved in sensing nutrients and controlling growth.
Okay.
Now, rapamycin itself has significant side effects because it hits TO broadly. But researchers are now trying to target specific downstream parts of that pathway, hoping to get the benefits without the side effects. More precision.
That sounds like a much smarter way to go. What else looks promising? Any specific genes?
Yes, the Clotho gene is a really hot topic.
Clotho, like the fate from Greek mythology.
Exactly. And appropriately named, maybe. Because mutations that disable Clotho cause accelerated aging in mice. But overexpressing it, giving mice extra Clotho, can extend their lifespan by around 30%.
30%? That's huge. How does it work?
Still being figured out, but it seems linked to insulin and IGF-1 signaling. Remember, we said less of that can be good for lifespan and also to how the body handles calcium. It's a really interesting hub molecule.
Definitely want to watch. Anything else?
NAD+ precursors are another big area. NAD+ is crucial for cellular energy production and DNA repair, and its levels decline with age.
Okay.
Supplementing with precursors like NMN or NR, which the body can use to make more NAD+ when, have been shown to extend lifespan in worms, rescue premature aging features in mice, and improve health markers. There's a lot of hope these could have benefits for human health span, though lifespan extension isn't proven yet.
Boosting cellular energy and repair makes intuitive sense.
And then looking really far ahead, there's nanotechnology.
Ah, the sci-fi stuff.
Pretty much. The dream here is to build intelligent nanodevices, tiny machines that could maybe go into cells, target specific age components, deliver drugs precisely, or even repair damage directly at the molecular level.
Wow, like tiny surgeons inside our cells.
That's the vision. Imagine nanobots cleaning up those protein aggregates in Alzheimer's or fixing DNA damage. It's obviously very futuristic, huge technical challenges, but the potential is immense for aging and age-related diseases.
Okay, so from philosophy to nanobots, we've covered a massive amount of ground in this deep dive on aging. We've gone through the theories, the changes, the current therapies, the future hopes. After digging through all this material, what really stands out to you as the main takeaway?
For me, it really is the sheer complexity, and maybe more importantly, the shift in thinking. Moving away from hunting for that one single cause, that one magic bullet,
Right.
to really appreciating aging as this deeply interconnected, systems-level process. It's not just one thing going wrong. It's a whole network of interactions, chemical, biological, electrical, even all influencing each other over time. That interconnectedness is key.
And what does that mean for us listening to this as we think about our own health, our own future? Does that complexity mean it's hopeless?
No, not at all. Actually, quite the opposite, I think. The sources make it clear. Aging isn't necessarily this fixed, inevitable decline that we just have to accept. It can be modified, it can be delayed, at least in lab models, and maybe in humans too. Intervention is possible. And all this research, especially the omics and systems biology approaches, they're giving us a much more holistic picture. The goal is shifting towards extending health span, those years of healthy, active life, not just lifespan. It's a real reason for optimism, I think.
That's a really important point, focusing on health span, which leads perfectly into our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on after this deep dive.
Okay.
Given everything we're learning, the incredibly rapid pace of discovery and understanding aging right down to the molecule, how might our whole society's views need to change? Our ideas about longevity, about work, retirement, what we expect from life, how might all that need to evolve in the coming decades?